say it's time for us to Jane Hart. Over to you, Jane.
Thanks very much, Don, and thanks for the lovely introduction there. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Perhaps somebody would like to pop in the chat whether they can hear me okay. That would be great. I hope you can hear me, Don. Yes, good. That sounds great. So thanks again for the introduction, and thanks again for inviting me to speak in this webinar series. And my topic, as you've mentioned, is the next generation of learning practices. And the reason I chose that was because it's actually the subtitle of the latest version of my Social Learning Handbook that I just recently produced. The first version I actually wrote back in late 2010, and so a lot has happened and changed since then. So I decided to write a new version, which was based on a lot of the blog posts and articles I've written over the last few years, as well as work that I've done with learning professionals and organizations around the world. And much of that work I did with Harold Jarkey, and there's his picture on the right-hand side, and he also wrote a whole chapter for me as well as supplied other material. So it's pretty much a collaborative effort here. And in the book, I wanted to show how workplace learning practices are becoming broader than just training. And in this webinar, obviously, I can't cover all the content of the book, but I hope it will provide a taster of what I talk about there. And at the end, I'll provide a link with where you can get hold of a copy of the PDF edition for a discounted price. That's if you make it all the way through the webinar. So today, what I wanted to talk about was to consider how we work, the way we learn at work is changing, and the importance of enterprise social networks for learning, and how new workplace learning practices are evolving, what this means for workplace learning professionals, and in particular highlight the importance of what I call walking the social talk. So let's start then with thinking about the web, and I don't think there can be many people whose lives haven't been influenced by the web in some way or other, particularly now the social web. So I really wanted to start off by asking you a question, and that is, how is the web changing the way you learn, or how has it changed the way you learn? If you think about how you were learning, let's say 5, 10 years ago, what differences have you seen? So I'll pause a while there just to see some of the comments coming in. How has the web changed the way you learn?
And already, of course, we're getting some thoughts coming through. I'm not going to comment in just for a moment, but it's a sort of combination of thoughts coming through, Jane, that look at speed, connectivity, less formality. It's the first place to go to. And as Matt sums it up, I don't know it, I'll Google it. So there's a sort of combination of quite common themes, I think, running through all this, which is of self-service, of speed, and the breadth of connection. As Nikki said, the breadth and depth of information, both of information and of people. But Jim Potts adds there's a lack of, quotes, authority, and whether Jim means that in a negative or positive way, I'm not quite sure. And John Talbot says, very interestingly, somebody somewhere has probably done it already. And John, I totally agree. Whenever I have a great idea, I go to the internet and I find that somebody else has already done it. And Jim says, hang on a second, it's negative in sense of authority. There may be that not all the information perhaps is authentic, as Lawal is saying. So, Jane, a breadth there of information, thoughts and comments, but clearly nobody's saying, oh, it hasn't changed my way of learning at all.
Indeed, and of course my own research shows that is clearly the case. And as you mentioned, the top 100 tools over the last 8 years, I've seen huge trends in the way people are doing things differently, particularly learning. And one of the things that's striking me quite significantly is that they're now taking control of their own learning in many different ways. They're doing their own thing. And I've talked about that quite a lot in many of the presentations I've given. So I don't want to go to that into too great detail, but I just want to pick out 3 things which I think are particularly important. And the first one is, of course, that we are now using the web to participate in much wider educational opportunities. You know, everybody here, I'm sure, is all too aware of the MOOC movement, which means that it's now so easy to sign up for an online course from a university or an educational establishment. But, you know, we don't even just need to think about it in terms of courses. There are plenty of other ways that we can find out about pretty much everything. And they're not necessarily instructional courses, but they're just resources in many formats: videos, screencasts, podcasts, whatever. Most of those have been created by individuals rather than perhaps mainstream publishers, and shared freely and willingly on the web. And as many of the commenters said, yes, you can just pick up and find out and go to places and Google it to find answers to questions and learn about pretty much everything on the web. But I think it's more than that. And as some of the other commenters have mentioned, it's about people, and it's about building professional networks of trusted friends and colleagues, using the social networks like, you know, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. But what people once thought were trivial places, they now become very important part of people's professional lives and allow them to make global connections with like-minded individuals. And many people refer to these as their personal learning networks because in many cases they often turn first to their professional networks if they have a problem or they want to find out about something. But it's clear that people are interacting with their professional networks in many different ways, not just to ask questions, but to share resources, to brainstorm, to just generally keep up to date with what their colleagues around the world are doing, and to learn from one another without even realizing it. And for me, I couldn't probably do my work now without being part of a professional network on Twitter particularly, but also LinkedIn and Google Plus and all those other kind of places. And what we're seeing now, as Ken Perlman talks about when he was writing in Forbes magazine, we're now seeing a new era of what he calls the knowledgeable networker. And he says that knowledgeable networkers are very good at what they do, and at the same time don't pretend to know it all. They consider the entire puzzle, not just their own area of expertise. They're integrative thinkers with broad interests and connections. They see how puzzles fit together without needing to know everything about each piece. Instead, and I think this is a key point, they know a lot of people and have a lot of information sources. So learning for many people is not just about going to one place, it's having access to so much, to people and to information. And Rob Cross and Andrew Parker, in their book, The Hidden Power of Social Networks, also identified how important they were from professionals. And they said that their study showed that individual expertise did not distinguish people as high performers. What distinguished high performers were larger and more diversified personal networks. Now, when I talk about professional networking on Twitter and so forth, there's usually somebody that points out to me, well, you can't learn to become a doctor using Twitter. And of course, that's true. But I think that's missing the point, because it's not about using Twitter to become a doctor. It's about using Twitter to become a better doctor, or certainly a better informed doctor, someone who keeps up to date with what's happening in their profession. And last year, well, actually 2012, when the Journal of Medical Internet Research looked at the way doctors use Twitter. Back then it was something like 25%, but I'm sure it's increased by now. But they're using the social media daily to scan or explore new medical information. And as they point out, social media will never replace traditional means of research and learning. It's an additional valuable channel that, in this case, can add to a physician's knowledge base. But I think that pretty much goes for every professional. It's no longer about just learning about existing knowledge and practices. It's what I call learning the new. And that's about finding out about stuff that's pretty much new to the world, if you like, rather than necessarily new to the individual. So new ideas, new concepts, new thinking, new skills, new resources, things that have yet to become codified within existing or new bodies of knowledge. So learning the new or keeping up to date with what's happening in your industry or profession is no longer something about going to an annual conference or reading a few industry magazines. It's about a continuous process of finding out about what's happening in the world and the way it's going to affect you as a professional or your industry or your company that you're working in. Now, learning the new is clearly a very different learning experience to learning the old, if you like, learning the existing bodies of knowledge, which are generally presented in a sort of logical, structured format. And it involves, with learning the new, being in the flow of new ideas, joining up the dots between unstructured pieces of knowledge that one encounters on the way. And John C.V. Brown, who I'm sure you have heard about, he's a well-known author and thinker, he calls this entrepreneurial learning. Now, he says that doesn't mean how to become an entrepreneur. It means how do you constantly look around you all the time for new ways, new resources to learn new things. That is the sense of entrepreneur he's talking about. And he used the analogy of a whitewater kayaker to explain how entrepreneurial learning, or learning the new as I call it, works. In other words, rather than being like a ship that sets its course and keeps going for a long time, having picked up a set of fixed assets that have been authoritatively transferred in delivery models, the whitewater kayaker participates in the ever-moving flows of activities and knowledge. Because in this new world of flows, participating in these knowledge flows is an active sport. So for all of us who've been out on the social web for many years now, learning will never be the same again because we have been whitewater kayaking through the social web. And it's certainly not the same way as, say, traditional learning, which is packaged up and structured and provided to us in a very prescriptive way. In fact, I'm seeing more and more cases where people are expected to participate in training events or work through online courses. In that way, they're becoming increasingly frustrated. A lot to do with the lack of autonomy that they're offered, but they're often being felt like being treated like idiots. And my colleague Clark Quinn actually described much e-learning as simply knowledge dumps parted up with trivial interactions. And once again, I think I hear about many people trying to avoid e-learning, particularly compliance training, where they're required to spend a specified time on an online course to prove their compliance. And it seems some are even paying their children to click through it for them. So it's for all these reasons that I've been talking about a social learning revolution, perhaps even a workplace learning revolution. Now, we need to explain here, of course, social learning in itself is nothing new. It's the way we've always learned from one another, from our family, our friends and our colleagues. It's just that we now have the technology, and that's made it an even more powerful experience. And it's changed the way many of us now prefer to learn. And individuals and teams also now have the tools to solve their own learning and performance problems. And once again, I'm seeing people bypass IT and L&D because they can more easily solve their problems themselves and in their teams. So what we've got now is two types of learning, the learning the old at one end of the spectrum and the learning the new at the right-hand end of the spectrum. On the left is this very highly directed learning that is all being designed and delivered and directed and managed by learning development function. And at the other, the self-organized, self-directed learning that I've just been talking about. It's about learning the new. So it's not just about learning the old, it is about learning the new. And as a learning development function, we can't ignore the fact that people need to be constantly aware of what's happening in the outside world and what new thinking is happening as this whole world moves on so fast. So for me, I think that I'm already seeing that organizations, learning development functions, are beginning to realize that they need to encourage this kind of learning. It's not about banning it or trying to shut it down or even trying to reproduce it in some way, but they need to support it. Now, it's clear that, many of us, we have the skills to be the whitewater kayakers, but there are many others out there who perhaps haven't even used the social web or even begun to develop some of these new skills to become knowledgeable networkers, as Ken Perlman called them. So we need to think about how we can support these new skills and what indeed are these new skills. My colleague Harold Jarkey calls this personal knowledge management, the whole concept of being able to manage your own knowledge on your own, whitewater kayaking through the flows. And it's about developing a set of processes individually. So it's not about being told how to do it. We all will have our own individual processes. And these will help us make sense of the world and work more effectively. And for those who are familiar with Harold's work, he talks about a 3-step process, which he calls seek, sense, share. This is his model. And seeking is finding things out and keeping up to date, what he calls personal curation, and building that network of colleagues is obviously very helpful in this regard, but it also allows us to pull information as well as have it pushed to us by trusted sources. We then filter and synthesize that information, and that's part of the whole sense-making process, is cutting out the noise from the signal to get what's really important, and then sharing it, or at least discerning with whom and what and how we should share it with others, which of course is the whole part of the concept of social learning. And as Harold says, PKM is in fact our part of this whole social learning contract. Now, most of the sharing that we've been doing has been out on the social web with our people outside, but now the ability to share is becoming increasingly important as internally in organizations we see the emergence of social platforms that are specifically designed to foster collaboration and communication and knowledge sharing among employees. So, of course, one of the main types of collaboration platforms that's really dominating the landscape at the moment is the enterprise social network. And examples called like Socialcast and Yammer and SmartForce Chatter and Social Text and Jive. And undoubtedly, you probably have one in your organization, even if you are probably not even aware of it. Someone somewhere has probably set it up. But the key thing, or the key feature of this technology, and here's just a quick sort of screenshot of my use of Yammer, is that they are very similar to public social networking tools, but at their core lies an activity stream. And this supports a constant stream or flow of real-time threaded conversations. And in fact, the activity stream has now replaced or is replacing the old school discussion forum as the way in which people have conversations. And in fact, many people have gone as far to say that they think that enterprise social networks will actually ultimately replace email as the primary vehicle for employee communications. Now, a large number of organizations now have an ESN, an enterprise social network, to support employee knowledge sharing and engagement. And as I've said, I think you probably find one in your own organization. Many of these have been voluntarily adopted by employees who saw the value for their own work. So they went out and perhaps signed up to Yammer, and then eventually their own organizations recognized the value and formally adopted them. Other organizations have taken a different approach. They've implemented it top-down. They've gone out and said, well, yeah, this is what we must have now, and they've mandated its use. And in those cases, employees have been less enthusiastic. Ooh, what's happened to the slide set? There it is. I've been less enthusiastic about its value. And I think that's probably due to a number of reasons, because it's clear that just by implementing some social enterprise technology isn't going to make people collaborate. Social isn't something you just bolt on to traditional businesses or even learning processes, but underpins a fundamental new approach to working and learning. And Dov Seidman, writing in Forbes magazine last year, 2012 anyway, points out that, we can't automatically employees interact. We can't just launch a social communication platform and expect them to be social. We can't order an employee to have a good idea or mandate rich creative collaborations any more than we can order a doctor to become more humane or a doctor to be more inspirational. So the focus needs to move from not the technology but the behaviors, and developing these new behaviors requires a different approach than perhaps the traditional method of technology training. So it's not about just installing Yammer and then training people how to use Yammer. I've said, and I've been quoted quite a lot by saying, you can't train people to be social, you can only show them what it's like to be social. And that's a really different approach, I think, for learning and development. So, but it is in this new area of workforce collaboration, which you can see I've added in now in orange onto that chart I showed you earlier, that there are plenty of new opportunities for learning development functions to begin to support work teams and groups by helping them with their knowledge sharing, which is going to be mainly unstructured and fairly self-directed. And it's about helping them work collaboratively and enable that continuous learning to take part of that, as part of that whole process. So not seeing learning as a separate activity, but seeing how we can support continuous knowledge sharing to share that information and new knowledge and skills people have brought in from their professional networks. So that is a new area of work I'm seeing learning and development teams do, and I'd be interested to hear how you, if any way, are helping teams and groups to do that, not by training them to be social, but how you're getting in to teams and groups and actually beginning to support them with their own knowledge sharing in their own, within an enterprise social network. So I'll pause there and let's see if we have any thoughts come in.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jane. And I've been having difficulty, I have to say, keeping up with everything because there's so much going on in the chat area. We're close to our limit. We've got a limit of 200 people in this room. We've got 185 people. There's so much high-quality discussion going on. It's a bit difficult to keep track of it, but thank you, everyone. Please do keep the discussion going. I'm just going to hit a button here to ensure that we are not picking up any other voices who may be dialed in.
Presentation mode is now enabled.
Okay. So that should mean, I think Richard was saying that we seem to have some background noise, so I've cut that out. Jane, you should be able to speak, and I should be able to speak with nobody else, which is great. The question, Jane, was how are you helping people work together? Work teams, work...
How are you helping your team share knowledge and work together?
And interesting, a lot of that had already come up in the discussion, Jane.
Right.
But, and there were some actually quite sophisticated things going on. But here we are. We've got some examples coming through already. People were already talking a lot about Yammer, actually before this, but we've got some interesting and subtle things going beyond simply using tools here. So John says, coach to ask and answer via social network, not to email. So coaching on the use of the tool, not concentrating on the tool itself. And collaboration, Chris agrees, is the idea. And I think Nigel sort of sums it up by talking about how culture trumps everything else out. Andrew Jacobs, interestingly, use of groups, looking like the groups may be being used successfully. Jane, are you picking out anything from the chat we've got going on here?
Yeah, it's coming through fast and furious, isn't it? There's some things I'll be picking up on a bit later, but maybe if I talk a little bit about some of the things I'm doing, and then we'll get some discussion around that.
But before we all jump into the echo chamber and madly persuade ourselves that everybody's gasping for this out there, we should also take a reality check. Norman Lamont says, very few in my organisation interested. There are no tools, but then again, there's no demand. So I think we also have to keep that in mind, the voice of someone who's out there and who doesn't feel that it's being, Norman, of course, is a great guy in this field, but it isn't getting much of a pull from his audience. Sorry, Jane, to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, not at all. And I think that's a very good point, because where we've been working with teams and helping them is not the teams who are not interested in or don't see any value in it, but perhaps those that already do see the value and want to kind of build on what's already done. And so it's about helping the teams build on those existing team practices. So it's not something new to them. It's not something extra to their work. All the while it's something they see it's something extra to their work that won't happen. It's got to be part of what they do. And it also involves building the right conditions to value it. And that means perhaps working with managers, because sometimes they think it's unnecessary. But generally, the teams generally have some sort of supportive manager in place who wants to see it happening and wants to value it and feels comfortable about sharing himself. So it's not about telling your team to share. It's about sharing and showing what it means to share. And for many people, they don't even understand what they should share and how they should share. So it's actually getting really immersed in the way the team works and working from within. So not necessarily, as I say, training them how to use the technology, but actually really just demonstrating by example what it is to share something and how you do it and when you do it and what way you do it. But at the core of it, it's about people recognizing that it's part of their everyday work. As soon as it's seen, as I said, something separate from their work, it really won't be done. So the teams where most successful is where it is part of their core activity, and they see going to their group, whatever it is, on the enterprise social network as part of their everyday work life. And if they're not using email, which many have them, teams are cutting out on, this is where they get their information about what's going on. And if they choose not to participate, not to be there, then they're missing out on an awful lot of work. So it's all about mandating their use. If they can't do their work, or if they can do their work without it, that's good enough. But if they need to perform well, they probably will have to use it. So it's not about making people go, making them collaborate. It's demonstrating the value that it brings to the team. And as I say, generally, we work with people who already recognize that. We don't bash our heads against brick walls with teams who don't even see any value or can't see any value or don't even want to get involved. It's not even worth going there. So we work with the teams and build on that. And generally, other teams then see how teams are working well on this and they want to get involved. So it's a sort of viral process rather than being mandated process. The other thing we're doing is helping them see how they can really collaborate purposefully and productively. And I think those two words at the end, purposefully and productively, are really important, because collaboration is a word that we all bandy around, me included, without actually really thinking about what it means. So it's about really seeing how this can help get work done, or get work done even better and more productively and purposefully. So it's not just collaboration for the sake of collaboration. And I think in many cases that's often seen as the case, we've got to collaborate because that's going to be the way forward. But it's got to be for a reason, and it's got to actually help people do their jobs better. And the other way we support teams is with their own performance problems. So we help them see that each one of them can support each other. They can ask questions there, they can share resources that they've created or links to things, and see it very much as a support network, not just necessarily as a knowledge sharing network. So but the key thing, I think, for us has been that it's as I say, it's not about training, it's about modeling and demonstrating the new social behaviors and leading by example, showing what we've done, how it works for us, and so forth. But I recognise that for learning and development professionals, it's actually quite a big jump to start doing this kind of work. All this work on the right-hand side is not familiar territory for most people. They're much more happy with what's going on the left-hand side, and there is a kind of gap in the middle. And I've been, again, working with organisations to help them sort of bring the two together and bridge that gap. And one of the ways of doing that is helping people think, well, it's not just about adding the social to these old ways of doing things, because people, A, don't like to be forced to be social, and often they don't want to use unfamiliar tools. And secondly, the whole point about using social tools is that they're fundamentally enabling tools, not command and control tools. So as soon as we start creating forced social learning experiences, we're actually not really helping to promote the sort of deeper social learning experiences which you get from a more, which go against, if you like, the underlying ideas and concepts of the social web, which most people enjoy. So I think there's a bit in the middle where we can kind of support and help teams to recognize the value of social through a middle of the road way, if you like, and I called that connected learning. And I think it fits between that sort of directed, structured approach to learning, that also known as training, and the way that we've always traditionally operated, and this sort of supporting this unstructured, self-directed approach to learning, and doing it actually on the same platform, the same enterprise social network, if you like, as work takes place. It's because it's really a useful way to host these connected learning activities, and it means that they can now learn and work in the same environment. And I think that it also offers learning development a big opportunity to start working on the same working platforms rather than putting everything in the old siloed learning platform. And by doing so, by bringing learning activities into the enterprise social network, means you can begin to build and inspire a culture of knowledge sharing, collaboration, and social learning across the organization. So you can begin through these processes to help people share more widely. So rather than jump completely to the right-hand side, perhaps going, supporting things a little bit more in the middle area here. And for me, there are 5 key principles to connected learning. And the first one is what I call scaffolding. And you probably saw that back there. I said that the learning development function scaffolds learning. It builds a framework for social learning to place. Rather than packaging up the content and delivering, it's about building a skeletal framework for the activity to take place, stimulating conversation and discussion. And all the content, if you like, the flesh on the bones of that skeleton is co-created with the participants. So it's not just a delivery of content mechanism. And the other thing about scaffolded learning is that the framework provides just enough structure without constraining personal social learning. So it supports participation and activity in the way that individuals feel most comfortable and suits them best. And that begins to help to drive the approach towards taking responsibility for their own learning rather than just being spoon-fed everything. And the focus is firmly on the conversation and the collaboration between the participants rather than, as I say, on the delivery of some expert-generated content, and encouraging participants to contribute their own content. In other words, as I put it, it's not about adding social to content, but it's about supporting social with content. So that you might want to create some content, and you probably will, to sort of generate and stimulate conversation, but that is not the main focus. And it's also about focusing on what participants are going to do as a result and setting that in whatever way is most appropriate, like peer or manager evaluation. But it's about evaluating performance outcomes rather than learning outcomes. So designing, or scaffolding, if you like, a social learning experience is important. But the key to success really comes in the way that it's facilitated when it's delivered. And it's much more about guiding a learning experience than sort of dominating it. And the facilitator, or whatever you want to call a person, is somebody who is not only familiar with the content, very familiar with the content, but is also somebody who could model those new social behaviors and act as a guide on the side rather than that sage on the stage model. Now, in my handbook, I talk about a number of different connected learning activities. And I've mentioned a few of them here: learning communities, where the emphasis is mainly on open, healthy discussion and debate rather than forced interaction as part of a course. So online social workshops, if you like, where the focus is again about co-creating content. Back-channel learning, which is about providing back-channel as we've got here, to training or other event, which is providing as much valuable content as the content that's being delivered. So hopefully Don's going to be able to capture everything we've got here, because this is just as much a part of the learning experience as me standing here or sitting here talking to you. And things like social mentoring, where employees can find their own mentors for ad hoc projects. So it's not a sort of top-down mentoring, organized mentoring program. And one of the big ways that we can start the whole process going, of course, is through social onboarding. So as soon as people arrive in the organization, they can be provided with support from day one in the platform which they're going to be using at work. And social onboarding is really taking off in many organizations, and it provides a valuable opportunity to get to know co-workers, company culture, to ask questions, to access resources, and just generally start that whole process of building the required social behaviours or desired social behaviours from the start. And in fact, in some organisations, it's actually happening before people even set foot into their organisations. They are getting access to an external group, let's say on Yammer, where they can actually move in and start finding their co-workers and finding out things. So when they actually arrive on the premises from day one, they're off to a great start. They're not mucking around for the day trying to find a desk or a PC or whatever. They know exactly what they're going to do, and they've met people and they're ready to go. So I'd be interested to see how many of you actually are using social onboarding processes to get your people, your new hires, off the ground. So I'll pause to get there for a few minutes.
Time to take a breather, Jane. Yes.
I'm trying to look at the chat at the same time.
Oh, you can't do that. Trust me, I'm looking at the chat, and I can't do that by myself. I'm struggling. Do you use social onboarding, guys? Do you have any way of getting people interested in exploring the organisation before they actually join?
Well, and yes, from then on, the early weeks, supporting people, yeah.
I mean, I remember the old days, Nokia used to fly people around the world to meet other people and work with them.
Yeah.
Maybe why they're not leading the handset race now.
So Julian says his starts get access and intro to social collaboration in my area. That's great. So I think it can take off in different places.
And
sure there are
John raises the point. He says, yes, from day one onwards, not beforehand. Honestly, it's a great way to get people on board. Nigel says social onboarding is onboarding, isn't it? Well, yeah, I'm not sure I agree. I think that a lot of onboarding is profoundly unsocial, Nigel, sometimes. It's pushing people through some very dull school-type learning, which is probably not what they need. Sorry, Jane.
Yes, and that's absolutely right, because, a lot of organisations, I've found that people are leaving before they've even been on the induction course, which is going to tell them about the mission, vision, and whatever of the organisation. They need to kind of get to grips with this stuff right from the beginning and supported by other people rather than just listening to these presentations. And I know one organisation that really realised the value of this because they were losing people before they'd even gone on the induction course, because they thought, well, if you can't be bothered to onboard me properly or induct me properly, I'm really not interested in staying. So I think many people now want to have a much more engaging experience when they come. They just want to sit there waiting to hear all about the boring presentations, as you say, about the organisation. So good. We've got some good stuff coming in there. Shall I proceed a little bit more now? Because I wanted to just mention another type of connected. By the way, I should mention that if you're interested in reading more about these, they are all in the Social Learning Handbook, which I've written more about there. So I can't really go into all these different ones, which actually can provide value in many different ways. But one fairly new thing that I've been working with is some organisation is the concept of building what I call learning flows. And I describe them as a sort of continuous, steady stream of social micro-learning activities. And the fact is that we've said that we need to help people with this continuous approach to learning. Learning shouldn't be an event, it should be a process. And this provides or helps to provide a daily or at least a fairly regular stream of small activities. And when I say activities, I mean reading something or doing something that probably take no more than 15 to 20 minutes. So microlearning has become quite popular, but it's more than just delivery of content. It's about offering or inviting and encouraging participation and contribution from individuals as part of that. So every day providing perhaps a little bit of information, some link to read and something to think about and something to discuss. That's just really going to take only 15 to 20 minutes, but over time can build up to something pretty substantial. And it could be something that actually has no end date, it just goes on and on. And to describe the value of these learning flows, I use the analogy that I mentioned earlier by John C.D. Brown, where he says that the instructionally designed course, which is what we're kind of fairly familiar with, is this kind of steamship or liner approach, where all activities are managed for you, and the ship goes on a particular tour itinerary, and you just have to follow along with it, and everything pretty much organized for you. Whereas out on the right hand side in the activity streams and our professional networks, and also in our workplace networks, in the activity streams and enterprise social networks, we have to take a fairly whitewater kayaking approach, where we have to make sense of what's going on, and we have to join the dots, and sometimes people find that a very difficult experience. So a learning flow is a kind of middle ground, and so it falls into this sort of connected learning approach. And instead of being out on the sort of the turbulent waters, if you like, of the fast-flowing stream of new knowledge, people can actually get onto the raft, if you like, steered by a guide, and they can experience that stream together. Everyone has a part in participating, if they want to, and navigating those waters, and so they can sit back and let other people do the work and just read, if you like, or they can actually start to support one another in the raft. And using this analogy in the context of flow, the guide therefore steers its way through the body of knowledge, whilst the process of working and learning together can actually help build confidence and competence in navigation skills, in the web navigation skills, but also in knowledge sharing. And we can start to build those collaborative and social behaviours that perhaps we want to see in the workforce or in the teams which perhaps are not there. So that's very much the middle road I'm talking about. But of course, analogies only go so far, and they sort of break down for a bit. So it's not obvious, perhaps, from that analogy that what I'm seeing in a learning flow is offers the opportunities for people to sort of take control over their learning, as we know that many people like to do. They can jump in and out of that raft and that flow if they like. There shouldn't be any pressure for people to stay. If it should be providing value for them, if it's not providing value, then they perhaps don't need to stay if they don't want to. The ability to interact as they want. So if they want to just sit back and read something rather than share their own thoughts, that should be fine. Constant participation is not expected. And the ability to be kept up to date with what these new social micro-learning activities should be up to them. They shouldn't be forced to have to receive emails or whatever. They should be able to dip in and out as they like, and fit in what they do into their work schedule as and when, 15 to 20 minutes, whenever it suits them. If they want to, if they have a busy day, they actually have to do it. And of course, use the most appropriate device to do it, whether it's through the web or through their mobile device or whatever. So, as I say, it's not about just delivering knowledge nuggets as we understand micro-learning, but about helping develop these vital new social and collaboration skills. And there are a number of different ways that you could perhaps create a learning flow, and there are pretty much three types that I've been sort of working on. The first one is sort of daily news flow, so it provides some daily news, so the guide selects the news and encourages people to reflect and discuss on it. That might be a team, a marketing team or a sales team, and it's just providing a little piece of knowledge every day and asking for reflections on how it perhaps might relate to their work. And in fact, that is probably the most similar to the sort of unstructured sharing and learning that takes place in activity streams. But it has the advantage that participants are therefore only subjected to one piece of news, something that the guide has seen as important. They've extracted the signal from the noise, and they're providing some sort of guide through today's news and providing some support to the team. So the team hasn't got to go out there and read everything or try to read everything. It can actually just get that one piece of daily news. And another type of flow is one I call the themed flow, and where it can provide activities, social micro-learning activities, organized within themes around a topic. And this is quite useful. So the guide, again, can bring together a number of related resources or activities and perhaps put them into some sort of logical sequence within the context of a theme. And so he or she can therefore help to participants to join up the dots between new ideas and resources. So it's not like 5 disconnected pieces of information, trying to help people see the links between them and, again, help them think about what it means for the organization or the team or the individuals, of course. And then the third type of flow is one I call a circular flow. So it's probably closest to the traditional course. It's a standard set of themes and activities, but it rotates, and you can just jump in and out as you want of the flow. And again, the content is there to support the social learning experience, and there's a guide rather than an instructor, and there's more autonomy, but it's probably more structured, this flow, than the other one. But nevertheless, the whole concept is about a continuous, steady stream of learning, however or whatever it consists of. Now,
we're getting close to time. There's a whole stack of things to deal with. So can we press on?
Yeah. Okay. So if you're interested in having a look at one, there's one to have a look at. Go to thelearningflow.com. You can find out more about it. I won't bang on about it anymore. Its example is, daily piece of news, whatever it is, and some commentary there. So that's an example. And of course, the guide is quite important because they pick out the important resources. They help to join the dots. They contextualize. They're very important in the process, but they're not, as I say, an instructor and dominating the process.
Yeah.
So I've talked about the new roles in all these different activities, but at the end of the day, I think to help people, we all need to be able to do this stuff ourselves. It's not about telling people what to do, it's about walking the social talk. And when people ask me what it means to be a social learning practitioner, somebody who helps people social learning, I said somebody who encourages, enables and supports sharing and collaboration across the organisation. And this is a role model, leading the way, demonstrating what it is to be social, modelling the new knowledge sharing collaboration behaviours. So it's not about just telling other people to social, it's actually being social oneself. And I know many people on the call are very familiar with this. They have been on the web for many, many years. They know what it is to be social, so they're able to help their organisations. But for some people, they perhaps need some help in understanding what it is to be social. So Harold and I have actually produced a little program where we help people work through a number of different tasks and activities to try and just get a flavour of things. I'm sure just glancing down at that, many of you think, oh, we can do all that, I've done all that. So that's probably not for you. But if you are interested in finding out more, Don's going to actually put the link in as he goes into the chat now. So if you want to just have a look at what it includes, and I'll say it's a self-paced program, but we've done it with organisations as well. So I've done an awful lot today. I know always.
I was hoping you were going to go through all those 25 points in great detail.
I've done a huge amount, so I'm just going to say, for all those who've managed to make it through to the bitter end, here is your reward.
Your reward is a 20% discount.
If you haven't got a copy of the book, and I'm sorry for all those who've already bought it, but if you haven't got a copy, you can get a copy for, that's the PDF version anyway, for £12. Where it's jam-packed with lots of stuff. And so I hope today has just been a taster for what's in the book if you're interested in reading more. And thanks again, Don, for inviting me. And I'm sure there's some questions that you want to pose to me
there are
now.
a few questions, yeah. There's a tremendous amount of questions. I want to say thank you to Jane, obviously, for a super presentation. So I'm just putting that on top of your book cover, Jane, so we've got the links there for people to pick up on. Thank you to everybody for participating as well, and I've already got questions coming through. And I'm going to, gosh, I don't know where to start because there are so many to start with. Let me go to my list. Quality of content, very quickly. If you're sharing stuff, Rhys Giles has a beef, as a lot of people do with SMEs, saying that they tend to, well, it's unfair to say there's a beef with them, but the fact is that people always want everything shared. Sharing everything is not the same as sharing, is it? It's a matter of doing a knowledge dump. How do we persuade people, if they're generating content or if they're sharing things online, that actually trying to dump everything there isn't the best way of doing it?
Okay, well, I think that comes back to the personal knowledge management skills, the practices. You need to discern where and what to share, and that's really part of understanding how to manage content. It's not about just retweeting everything you see on the site or sharing everything. It is actually about discerning where and what to share, and that's a new skill. And I noticed, from my time on the web, that people do actually get that over time. But unfortunately, in organisations where it's people are being tracked and monitored in terms of what they're sharing, we do get a lot of oversharing because people are being said, well, if the more you share, obviously the better you are, but it isn't the case. So that is a downside to tracking participation, because actually we want somebody just give you the nuggets of the gems of wisdom from time to time, rather than just sharing everything they see in sight. So I think that, if you've got metrics in place for knowledge sharing, I think they actually go against a reasonable sharing behaviour.
Somebody's just saying that, Dave, that they can't get to your Social Learning Handbook discounted page, Jane.
Let me just look. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe it should have a little slash at the end of it. Let's try that, shall we?
Probably needs a slash at the end.
Shall we pop that in if we can? Let's see if that works. Yes, it's my fault. I've not put it on there, have I? Does that work for everybody?
I can't make it work. Does it work? Yes, it works. Hurrah!
Okay, so don't take a look at what I've written on that slide then. Look at what's in the chat stream.
Ignore the slide, look at the text, Jane.
Sorry about that, everybody.
No, that's cool. It's not like you're an expert in how to share things online or anything.
No, of course not, no.
There we are, and that's now altered in the resource box as well.
So beware oversharing, yes.
Yes, now it comes back to the point about sharing. We've had a very interesting and rich discussion about sharing. Antonia Ray said poor content's often the cause of frustration. Simon said, look, if you don't participate, you get limited value. You need to share. But then Richard agreed, saying, look, we've got lots of lurkers. We need to get more involved. But other people said, no, actually, lurkers get what they want, and they have a right to be there too. Julian agreed as well. He said, lurkers may actually be talking to other people, but somewhere else. And Joe raised a question asking, does social sharing change the focus? Is it more about sharing than about telling, or sharing than telling? So how much is lurking something we should be worried about? How much is it a valid participation? Is sharing going to alter the way you get value out of a community?
Well, I think lurking is perfectly okay to start with, but it's not meant to be a process that, you stay in. You're supposed to move on from lurking. You can lurk at the beginning just to understand the environment and what's happening, and I think that's fair enough. But eventually we want people to start to feel confident and competent to share, and it's taken to that next journey, and that's where somebody can support that by helping to see why people perhaps are reluctant to share and try and address those issues, and they might have to happen offline. But to go back to that question about oversharing, I often use a quote by Georges Louis Borges, who says, don't talk unless you can improve the silence. And that might be actually you might think that I'm contradicting what I've said about sharing, but I think we need to be very clear and careful. Is this really adding something? Are we really adding any value here? If we're just regurgitating or being an echo chamber, as you said, we're not actually doing any additional. We really need to be, and not just share for sharing's sake. And that can be really a problem, as I said, where organisations are measuring participation rates.
Yes. Measuring participation rates is such a weird measure to use. Chris Bond points out that we lurkers also discuss amongst ourselves. So, of course, by sharing that, Chris, you've stopped being a lurker. But I think it's a very good point. And Charles says it's an unnecessarily pejorative term. Yes, well, and of course I'm a lurker in some areas. In other places I'm a massive participant and a leader. So it's a complicated thing. But I think your point about sharing when you've got something to say is valid. Nick Shackleton-Jones, interestingly, says, well, I'll talk and I'll blog when I've got something to say. But I say to him, Nick, you've got far more to share. You know far more than you think you know, so please do it more often. And I think there's always a battle there to be had with perhaps learning and development having a new role of prompting people to share more often. Now, talking about the new role for sharing for learning and development professionals, Helen Blunden said that she managed to get social onboarding in place by having a tantrum and then doing a demonstration. And I think actually that does show something about the new role of L&D. And we had a very rich discussion about how we need to change what we're doing. And Nigel said, well, look, people are frustrated because we're getting poor specification, but other people are saying, no, we need to go out and change the specification. Or there is no specification, or it's set by the wrong people. So clearly, the old classroom training model doesn't work in this new culture. What skills do we need, Jane, to be effective in the social learning world?
We're going to need a variety of new skills to be able to cope with all these different approaches. We're still going to need the old school trainers, if you like, and e-learning designers, but we're going to need people who are totally immersed in social and understand what it means so that they can, as I say, model the new behaviors. So like moving from trainers to mentors, to coaches, to supporters, and so it starts with walking the social talk. If you can go into an organization, or you can go into your own organization and show what you've been doing, share what you've been doing, where am I, and demonstrate the value for you and your team, people will take notice of you. If you go in and say, you must do this, you must do that, it doesn't really work. So that's why a lot of what I do is I just demonstrate how I work professionally, how I work with teams, how I work with groups and so forth. And that's important. People can begin to see the values for them, the relevancy and the values for themselves. And sometimes it takes a lot of time to help people to do that. And, we've got digital literacies here, but it's about doing it in the context of work. It's not seen as a separate activity. It's about how we contribute internally with our teams and how we do this within our teams rather than just learning it for its own sake. So, as professionals, we need to start. It needs to start with us first, and then before we can even help anybody else to do this.
Charles raises the point, there are 185 contributors here, maybe there are 185 attendees, maybe 20 contributors. Actually, I think we have more contributors than that, Charles, but you're right, there's a long-tail distribution, a power distribution of who contributes the more. And I'm not, Andrew Jacobs says another way of saying that is to say it's always loudest at the shallow end. I'm not convinced that people who lurk necessarily are brighter than everybody else or are shyer than everybody else, but there may be very good reasons. Those two may be true. They may be, as Jim said earlier, technically, they may be technically shy, if you like, either that they feel not that they don't know how to do it, they just don't feel comfortable in that environment.
Exactly, and it takes time working with people like that. And as I say, maybe offline stuff that you need to do. And most of it is they think they don't have anything of value to share, and that's what it is. And
I take my hat off to them. Mike's saying, how long before this presentation's uploaded so I can access it again? It's very interesting. It is very interesting. And it will be uploaded by Monday. And a big black blob just appeared on my screen saying that Adobe Connect is about to turn this off because there's another scheduled event coming up. And I, as a super professional learning and development guy, have completely overshot the time. I notice it's gone 11 o'clock. We never run over on the Learning and Skills group, except when we are completely caught up with something like this, because it is such a fantastic topic. And also, there are lots of things we wanted to handle. I wanted to talk about Hofstede and international cultures. Frank brought up a question about how social works across different cultures. Is it information flows? What about the quality of your network? What about books and turning on to the next page? Teams working, keeping people in one place, technology. And what about the gardening club? We had a huge discussion about the gardening club. All of this, Jane, we're going to have to invite you back for another session. Look, everybody who's contributed, thank you so much, everybody, for pitching in with your great talk, your great thoughts, and thank you, Jane, for your great talk. One of the most stimulating LSG webinars I've been to, and my mind is buzzing. Thank you very much, Jane. And yes, well, if you've enjoyed it,